Welcome to episode 36 of Shane Talks 99, August 20th, 1999. All right, let's get this out of the way first. Complete truth and honesty. I could not bring myself to watch Universal Soldier: The Return. It's a sequel to the 1992 film, which saw Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren go after each other as like these super soldiers. In 1999, I really kind of wanted to see it. Like I was in for it because like I liked a lot of the Van Damme 90s, like what are bad movies. I kind of dug them. Like that was kind of like my time for when I enjoyed Van Damme stuff. And so like I usually give Van Damme a break around that point. Like he did, like Time Cop and Sudden Death and even Double Team are like bad movies that I like really liked when I was, a teenager and whatnot. But like so one I thought I might be willing to give it a shot. So like the one night I sat down and I thought, okay, let's see if I can suffer through this movie. I found out it's not available to stream anywhere on any platform for free. I was not willing to pay for this movie. I wasn't even willing to pay $5 to rent this movie, let alone to own this movie. Um, so I didn't watch it. So I can literally say that I do not remember anything good about this movie. I think Bill Goldberg is in this movie, like another wrestler who tried to become an actor. Like just just didn't like the movie, wasn't willing to go back and give it another shot. I mean I was willing to, but I was also not willing to pay to try. So didn't watch it. Let's just look at the numbers real quick for Universal Soldier: The Return. Currently has a 4.2 on the IMDb. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 5% from critics. It has a 24% from audiences. This movie had a $45 million budget. I mean, I remember there being a lot of special effects and stuff in this. Movie only made $10 million at the box office. I don't even think it was released internationally, which is weird because it's like a Van Damme movie. Like I would assume it would do well overseas, but I couldn't find any numbers saying any box office grosses from outside of the US. So bad movie. Nobody likes this movie. Wasn't really worth my time. I almost gave it a shot, but it just the movie was directed by a guy named Mick Rogers. This was his first directing job. Mick Rogers did a lot of stunt work in Hollywood. I guess that's how he got this directing role. But he never directed another movie after that. In 25 years, he's never been a director on anything ever again. Um, he went right back to doing stunt work and becoming a big guy in the stunt department, where he still works today in the stunt department. So good for him. Longevity of a Hollywood career, just not as a director, because this movie sucks from what I remember. It's been a long time, but I don't remember anything good about it. So let's talk about the movies that I did watch this week. First up, Mickey Blue Eyes. Mickey Blue Eyes is a very typical paint by number mixture that used a lot of things in the 90s, specifically a lot of things in 1999 that kind of worked for other movies, and it just kind of put them all together. Like Mickey Blue Eyes is a rom com. Mickey Blue Eyes is a mob com. Mickey Blue Eyes is a rom com. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. It's like I'm getting this feeling that by the late 90s, a lot of Hollywood was burnt out on movies like The Godfather, like that whole franchise. We had three of them. They were burnt out on stuff like Goodfellas. And like somebody just decided, let's take mobsters and let's make them funny. Let's do comedy with mobsters. We've seen mobsters be bad guys. Now let's make mobsters funny. In March of 1999, this kind of worked. We got a movie called Analyze This. We talked about it. This was one of the ones from 2022, an episode that I did where I talked about Analyze This, which at least kept an R-rated mobster, so we could at least get funny mobsters that curse with Robert De Niro. But this time we got a PG-13 version, and we swapped out Robert De Niro for James Caan, who I like James Caan a lot. And both James Caan and Robert De Niro have both worked with Francis Ford Coppola on different Godfather, projects and whatnot. So yeah, I just don't know. What else in here? So we had Hugh Grant as our leading romantic guy. So that's another thing from the 1990 film Notting Hill. Hugh Grant had a big year as far as trying to like lead romantic movies. The other thing that was in this movie that I just felt screamed in 1999 was the situational sexual humor or misrepresented situational sexual humor. Like this gag was used a lot and used heavily in June when we talked about the Austin Powers and the Spy Who Shagged Me. There were scenes, two different scenes in that movie where Austin and Felicity get in situations where they're seen by other people, and the other people just hear their dialogue. Specifically, like the tent scene where it's all done with shadows and whatnot. Um, but when you hear the dialogue and it's taken out of context of what's really going on, you take it as a very sexual comment, something very overtly sexual, um, that gets used in one specific scene in this movie between Hugh Grant and another male character, where they're in the men's room, and then another male comes in and overhears the conversation between Hugh and this other guy, and like it's funny. It's situational sexual humor because what we're hearing being said and the third person is interpreting it that way is not at all what we know is really going on in the scene. So again, something that was used kind of in the late 90s and specifically in 1999. So that's a lot of 1999 staples that we have going on right there in this film. And it's just an okay film. It's just okay. It's got some moments. It's got some humor that I laughed at again. It's got some jokes that are specifically designed to make reference to the mobster genre. It's got its typical, guy gets in over his head story elements, not necessarily a fish out of water, but kind of a variation of fish out of water storyline. Humorous situational irony that actually I honestly have to say, like the third act twist that happens at the end of the movie, I actually think it was okay. I didn't remember it, so rewatching the movie when it happened, I was like, wait, I know there's something that like I'm not seeing exactly what I thought I was seeing, and then they reveal it, and I'm like, ah, yeah, that's right, and it works. I thought it was okay. Female lead in this movie is Jean Tripplehorn. Jean Tripplehorn obviously got my attention back in 1992. She was one of the co-stars of the film Basic Instinct. She has a pretty graphic sexual scene in that movie. Definitely has stuck out in my head over the years. She also went on to do films like The Firm, Sliding Doors, and Very Bad Things, which films I like on different levels. Unfortunately, she was also a part of the terrible film Waterworld, but I mean, it was early in her career. But so like the cast is I can't even really go into the rest of the cast. Like this cast is a huge ensemble of literally every actor that you've ever seen in a mobster movie, background extra sidekick character in a mobster movie. Like I honestly can't tell you any of their names. I don't think I'm drawing a blank on most of them, but like when you see their faces, like these are people that you're like, I know that face. That's a mobster's face. Like you could literally just see a photo of him and know I've seen that guy in multiple mobster movies. Um, Funny enough, 9 members of this cast of Mickey Blue Eyes at some point appeared on the TV show The Sopranos. So I mean, like typecasting. Like I'm not kidding when I say that you recognize their face and you probably don't know their name. So really, overall, the movie is just very standard. It's kind of a forgettable rom-com. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. If it's your jam, it's your jam. It's a PG-13 1999 rom-com. It uses New York City mobsters as kind of its subplot, moving device to go through the story. There's nothing in this movie that makes me want to tell you to rush out and see it unless you like literally have a huge crush on Hugh Grant and have seen every other piece of work he's ever done and you just need to complete it. Like this isn't his worst movie, but there's also really nothing that like stands out about it as being like amazing in any way. All right, finally, let's talk about the movie that I am actually super excited to talk about this week. And it is a film that I have a really good connection to. I am one of the very few small group of people on this planet who has ever seen the original ending to this movie before the studio at the last minute decided to make this huge change and change the ending. I had the chance. We'll get to that. Let's go through the movie first, and then we'll talk about the ending. So like the third movie in 1999 that came out on August 20th is Kevin Williamson's directorial debut, a film called Teaching Mrs. Tingle. There's so many things to break down in that sentence that I just said. First off, Kevin Williamson's directorial debut. He'd never directed anything else. And to this day, as of the minute I'm recording this, this is the only film that Kevin Williamson has ever directed. That's going to change soon because as of now, he is attached to be the director of the seventh Scream film. Um, let's hope that goes through. I really enjoy him. I think the directing in this movie was fun. I'd like to see what he does with the characters that he, created, the franchise that he created. So, but as of this minute, the only film Kevin Williamson has ever directed is Teaching Mrs. Tingle. Second, Teaching Mrs. Tingle. Not the original name of the script, not the original production name of this. The name of this film was changed later on. The name of this film was changed from Killing Mrs. Tingle to Teaching Mrs. Tingle in direct correlation and response by Miramax to an unfortunate event that happened that was the Columbine Massacre. And Columbine changed a lot of things in this world, and Hollywood definitely was changed by Columbine. Not only was the title of this movie changed, Scream 3 is notorious for being very much affected by Columbine. Scream 3 was forced to make a killer that was not violent. It was forced to make a killer who didn't kill like on screen using weapons for the most part. It was a very dumbed down, very lame, very not good Scream movie. I still enjoy it. It still has elements that I like to it. I still appreciate it for that point of my life and being the, the original trilogy of Sidney Prescott. But like a lot changed in that script because of Columbine. The producers, Miramax, they kind of phoned that project in. It could have been a lot better. It could have been a lot better because Kevin Williamson actually turned down writing the full script for Scream 3 so that he could write and direct Killing Mrs. Tingle, Teaching Mrs. Tingle. So instead, he gave Miramax like an outline for Scream 3 and what he wanted to have done in Scream 3. Unfortunately, Miramax didn't listen to it at all. They went with Aaron Kruger. Aaron Kruger made that campy movie that we got. But okay, so side note about that. The plot outline for Scream 3 that Kevin Williamson turned in, it actually later became made into the Kevin Bacon television show called The Following. And the Cult of Stu, which is what it was in the Scream 3 treatment, yes, Stu Macher survived the original Scream movie. He was in jail, and he had a cult of people who worshipped him, much like the serial killing novelist who James Purefoy plays in the TV series. But he's got this cult of people who are willing to do anything for him. And the original treatment for Scream 3 was that his cult of followers were the ones that were going after Sidney, and he was manipulating it. Like multiple killers were supposed to be revealed through the plot of the movie. Where it was literally like, wait a minute, how are there all these people, and why are there all these different people coming after Sidney? And it was because they were all being manipulated by Stu Macher from jail, which is essentially what goes on in The Following. The Following was a really great show. Let me say that. The first season of The Following was a really great show. Didn't really care for the second season, but it's still worth at least watching the first season of it. So, like, Kevin Williamson, where do I even begin with Kevin Williamson? From like the minute I snuck into Cinema 7 at Clearwater Crossing, years before I worked for Clearwater, I went on the opening night of Scream in December. I snuck into the theater. I was technically only 16 at the time, couldn't buy a ticket to an R-rated movie by myself. Bought a ticket to something else, couldn't tell you what it was. Scoped out the lobby, saw the late show. I think it was like a 10:45, maybe an 11 o'clock show, Scream in Theater 7. Pulled my typical move to get past the ticket taker, and just swooped right into Theater 7, ducked down in my seat until the movie started, and watched Scream. And I became obsessed with this guy, Kevin Williamson. He wrote a script that was just it just shouted to me. It shouted because of my generation. It shouted because it paid homage to things that like the horror movies that I had grown up watching, slashers and Halloween and Friday the 13th. And like it was self-aware characters that talked about essentially being in a horror movie while they were in a horror movie. And it was like Kevin Smith dialogue. How I pretended I talked to people is how Kevin Williamson wrote characters. So like After Scream, I literally became obsessed with Kevin Williamson. I watched him when he did, I know he wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then he wrote Scream 2, and then he wrote The Faculty, and like I'm pretty sure if I remember right, he did a rewrite on one of the versions of Halloween H2O, another, a script that I don't think he's actually credited as being a writer, but I think I have heard he's involved in it. But like Halloween H2O took something I loved from my childhood of Halloween and then updated it with being modern and connecting the 20-year gap between me and the movie. Like it's just a movie I fell in love with. And like I said, on top of those other horror movies I just mentioned, like created like I liked the slasher genre when I was younger, but they were just like slasher movies that were older than me. All those movies I just named that Kevin Williamson were involved got me obsessed with the horror genre, the slasher genre. Um, and then I like to top it all off. So not only did get me obsessed with the horror slasher genre, this is the guy who wrote and created Dawson's Creek, television show that's about a kid who wants to be a filmmaker. Done. So game over. I'm in a TV show that launched my senior year of high school. It's over for me. I am, for the rest of my life, a Kevin Williamson fanboy who grew up on the genre that he created for me in the late 90s. All right, I digress. That was a huge tangent that I just went on. Let's get back to 1999. Let's talk about Killing Mrs. Sorry, Teaching Mrs. Tingle. Teaching Mrs. Tingle is not a slasher movie. It's not even a horror movie. It is a very well done psychological thriller. And like when I was rewatching it, I literally compare it when I talk about this movie. I compare it to the movie Misery, the James Caan. Right back to James Caan, who we just talked about. James Caan, Kathy Bates, Stephen King story. You know, about a guy. In this one, it's a teacher who's been kidnapped by her students who are, kind of getting in over their heads, doing things they shouldn't do, and like the psychological warfare that goes on between these three kids and this teacher, and what Helen Mirren does in this role, and like the way it was written, and the way she gets these kids to turn on each other, the things she says and does to them to get them to question what they're doing, to question each other, to question their motives, to question like they just she plants so many seeds of doubt in the minds of these kids who, like I said, just keep getting in over their head with this situation and trying to figure out how to get out of it and how to survive everything that's going to, go on. She starts telling them stories about her life and like things in her life, like eerily resemble the things that are going on in this love triangle that's going on between these three kids that have come over and, taken her hostage. Like, it really makes us as the viewer like question the truthfulness behind these stories that she's telling. Remember that comment. The stories Mrs. Tingle tells makes us as an audience question the truthfulness behind the stories that she tells. Remember that. Remember that's going to be important down the road here pretty soon. So we've got this evil teacher played by Helen Mirren, and Helen Mirren is gorgeous. Let's see, 25 years ago, she would have been 65. No, 55. She would have been 55 at this point. Still beautiful then. Now at almost 80 years old, Helen Mirren is gorgeous. Like, it's still absolutely beautiful as a woman. And she is top notch in this film. Her demeanor, her attitude, her delivery, her facial expressions, everything about this character is just perfect. The way she manipulates these kids, it is an amazing performance in what I will admit is an okay script. But like I said, the concept of the script coupled with her performance, I think, is what really carries this movie. And this movie sees three actors, two of which are trying to escape their CW persona of this, good boy, good girl CW character, wholesome image that we had in the late 90s for the shows that they were involved in. And I've already talked about Dawson's Creek, and Katie Holmes stars in this movie. Katie Holmes like is trying. I've talked about this before on other episodes, and I will continue to talk about her attempt to shed her good girl persona. And it started pretty quickly because, like, immediately after she got into Dawson's Creek in '97, the next year she did a movie called Disturbing Behavior, a I want to call it a horror movie, but it's more of like a teenage psychological, like weird movie. Like I don't even know what genre it would fall in. Like it's not. I guess it's kind of horror, but not like slasher horror. It's like mad scientist horror movie type thing. But anyway, like in '98, she did disturbing behavior. Earlier this year, we talked about her turning Go, where she's still kind of a good girl in Go, but like still a bad girl in Go also. Then we get to this movie, and then we've actually got one more year to wait because in 2000 she finally sheds it all, goes topless in a film called The Gift, and that was like the no turning back moment of she's not the good girl she plays on Dawson's Creek. And if you needed her to go one step further, she did a couple of years later eventually marry Tom Cruise and got into Scientology briefly, and she did what she could to not be seen as Joey Potter for the rest of her life. More power to her. We also had Barry Watson in this movie. Barry Watson, who was definitely trying to get rid of his, Christian values image that he portrayed on Seventh Heaven. I know he wasn't on every year, but I mean, at least the beginning of the show. I don't remember when he stepped away from the show, but he started off as one of the good kids on Seventh Heaven, and so he eventually tried to grow himself out of that. This was his first film role that he did, like film role, not just on television and whatnot. Well, finally, our last actress in this movie is a woman named Marissa Coughlin. Coughlin, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. Um, she had a extremely short run of good moments in the '90s. This was her first feature film. Next year in 2000, she's going to do Gossip, which is a movie that I revisited a couple years ago during the pandemic, just because I couldn't remember if I liked it or not. I was kind of in a huge like '90s, 2000s teen, era, and so I watched a bunch of them. Gossip being one of them. I remember Gossip was okay. It wasn't great, but it wasn't also as bad as I thought it was going to be. Um, in 2001, Marissa did Freddy Got Fingered and Super Troopers. So, like, two pretty big comedies that year she was involved in, and literally nothing else on her resume. I say that she did Super Troopers 2 also, but other than that, like, had a run of movies of things that I've never heard of. So I don't know if they were direct to video. I don't know. I don't know. And that makes me sad because watching Marissa in this movie, like I actually feel like she brought a lot to the character. It's kind of a pretty stereotypical character that she played, but I felt like she did it really well. Um, she definitely gave me vibes that you could have picked her up and put her into Can't Hardly Wait, or you could have put her into American Pie, and she would have fit. Like she would have fit perfectly. Like I could see her as like Mina Suvari's character in American Pie, like without a question, without a doubt, like no hesitation with that casting. Like she portrayed her character very, very well in the movie, and her character gets manipulated a lot by Helen Mirren, but like she also fights back, and she has some really good expositional scenes with Helen Mirren. Um, so all right, let's wrap this up. Let's wrap this up. Let's get to the end of this movie. We'll talk about the end of the movie. So, spoiler alert: I'm going to talk about the end of this movie. A lot of times, I try to avoid, giving away ends to movies and whatnot, but for this, I have to talk about it. This film ends with a lot of craziness going on in Mrs. Tingle's house. She escapes her captors, tries to shoot one of them with a crossbow. She misses. The crossbow goes through the front door and ends up hitting another girl who was standing outside, who was coming to visit Miss Tingle and see if she was okay. So everyone's looking around thinking that Miss Tingle killed this girl because the crossbow, goes through the window, goes through the girl. Katie Holmes goes over, feels her pulse, tells everybody that she's dead, which is a lie. We find out in a minute or two later, Miss Tingle starts confessing to everything that happened because she feels the guilt of thinking that she killed this girl. While she's confessing, the principal shows up because, the speed of plot needed that to happen. He shows up, he overhears the whole thing, says he's going to call the cops, says that Mrs. Tingle was fired. And this is the moment where the universe goes in two different directions. In the version that got shown in theaters, we cut to graduation day and we see Katie Holmes is the valedictorian, which is what she was trying to make sure happened throughout. That was her reasoning for everything that was going on in the film, is because Mrs. Tingle was about to make her not be the valedictorian, which she'd been trying to be her whole entire life. Yeah, that's kind of a lame part of the plot, but anyway, that's where we were going with this movie. So anyway, happy ending, right? We see We assume Miss Tingle got fired. You know, she didn't actually kill anybody, so she's not in jail or anything. We don't really know other than, what we saw was happening. But we see that Katie Holmes still got to be the valedictorian that she wanted to be. Happy ending for Miramax. Let me tell you what really happened. Let me tell you, let's go back to my statement. Remember when I was talking about Mrs. Tingle manipulating kids in the film? Remember when I was talking about how she was telling stories to kids about her life, and as a viewer, we just kind of had to question it, like, is she telling the truth? What if the real purpose behind killing Mrs. Tingle is a movie that manipulates everyone, including us as the audience? Let me explain. Back in 1999, when I was working at Clearwater, we had a promotional, not even a promotional screening. This was a press screening of this movie a couple of days before it came out. So we had the print early. So I was able to watch the movie multiple days, not just a day or two early, multiple days early as I was getting ready for our company to show it to the press so the press could write their reviews of the movie. Small amount of people saw this version of the movie. On Thursday, we got a new last reel sent to our theater, and we were instructed take off the last reel of killing Mrs. Tingle, teaching Mrs. Tingle, and put on this new ending, which is the ending that I just told you about. Now, let me tell you about the ending that I saw that not very many people did. Mr. Jason L. Mayer did see this same ending with me, so he was there. Um, Before the last reel of the film was replaced and the original ending lost forever. I don't even think it's on the DVD. It could be on the Blu-ray. I think maybe at one point I heard this might have shown up on the Blu-ray release of the movie. Cannot confirm that at this moment. After Mrs. Tingle confesses everything, after the principal shows up, after the principal says he's going to call the cops, we do not cut to graduation day. What we cut to instead is a classroom. We cut to specifically a creative writing classroom. I'm pretty sure it says it in big letters on the blackboard behind Katie Holmes' figure because we see Katie Holmes standing in front of the blackboard that says creative writing class or something along those lines. Something that lets you know you are in a college class that is about fictional creative writing. Katie Holmes is standing there. She is reading from a paper in front of her. That paper that she is reading, we're led to believe is probably a creative writing assignment. I mean, it is a creative writing class. Why would she not be reading a creative writing assignment? And what are creative writing assignments but fictional works? So as she's standing there, she's reading lines from the climax of the movie, from the thing that we just saw, from the thing that we just witnessed. She is reading it as if it is a story. So the question now becomes, was everything we as the audience just watched, was that just a story that Katie Holmes was telling that we were seeing a visual representation of it? That's the brilliance of this ending of the movie. Was the entire film that we just sat through, was that all just a creative writing assignment? And if it was, did any of these events actually really happen? Was this creative writing assignment based on real events? Did any of these things really happen in the real world? Or was it just completely a fictional creative writing assignment? We as the audience don't know. We as the audience are confused and don't know what we're sitting through. But the film ends with a freeze frame where Katie Holmes' character finishes her creative writing assignment and just smiles.